we definitely are entering a new era, or have entered a new era, where the old style of thinking has to be revised, new challenges have to be met, and new ways of thinking and new institutions are needed. In this context, we have invited a series of distinguished experts to speak and throw light on various facets of the subject. And today I'm extremely honored to welcome a very familiar and respected name in the strategic community of India, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, IFS, retired. He served as our ambassador to Myanmar and held very, very important positions across the globe, dealing with India's relationships with our neighbors and other countries. Welcome, Ambassador Bhatia, to this.
Thank you very much, Sapya.
We're very honored to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Ambassador Bhatia is also a distinguished fellow at the Gateway House, a leading think tank of India, and we are very honored to also have him as a governing council member of the Asian Confluence. Ambassador Bhatia, may I just start this conversation by asking you that the COVID-19 era forces us as a world, as nations, to think new ways of collaboration. It seems that the days of competition have been overtaken by the days of collaboration to come. And to deal with such overwhelming challenges. And in this context, how do you see, what are the values and what are the ways in which you see that regional cooperation, especially in the context of South Asia and Southeast Asia and in Asia in general, how do you see that panning out in the coming years? Do you see any marked change happening, or is it going to be business as usual, or are we entering a new normal?
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this wonderful series of conversations organized by AsCon. I'm very happy to be here because I know AsCon, under your leadership, has been doing wonderful work in Northeast and in forging its friendships and linkages around the world. And so in that context, let me first comment something by way of my view on your opening remarks, and then I'll come straight onto your question about South Asia and cooperation. You are absolutely right in stressing that this unprecedented pandemic that the world is coping with has really changed the way in which we live, we work, we think, and we even communicate with each other. Like all of you, I've not stepped out of my home for the past 3 weeks, except for a couple of errands for essential items. And this is the kind of life nobody really has been used to before. So this is definitely a new era, I agree. Where I probably disagree with you respectfully is whether this pandemic has changed the human nature. I think cooperation, certainly it will inculcate, it will strengthen, but whether it has weakened the impulses for competition and contestation and conflict, that is a deeper subject. We probably would go into this later. Probably we will have to see how humanity comes out of this formidable calamity before we start drawing some conclusions about the impact of pandemic on human nature. But coming now to your central question, which is very valid, how do we see the impact of this massive global pandemic on the broad patterns of international cooperation, but actually focusing our sights on regional cooperation in South Asia? And I'm particularly to talk from the perspective of our listeners in Northeast, who may be particularly interested in this theme. having been to Northeast many times and having had very wide-spread interactions and conversations with young people as well as political leaders, intellectual leaders there, it is easy for me intellectually to try to look at the regional cooperation from the perspective of Guwahati or Shillong or other provincial capitals. And this is where I would say that we would have derived much satisfaction from the fact that we saw last month our leadership taking some very concrete steps to try to resuscitate and re-energize the forum of SAC, the South Asian Regional Cooperation Forum, which has been there since 1985, was looked at, and Prime Minister Modi called a virtual summit of the leaders of these 8 countries in order to find a way out to help each other and see how this pandemic can be dealt with in a collective manner. When he began this, there was a lot of skepticism, but that skepticism began to disappear because the very first virtual summit, despite some provocations from a particular member, ended up in a very positive and constructive outcome. Fundamentally, what was agreed was that the tools that are needed to fight this pandemic, they will all be developed collectively and used collectively. What are these tools? We need trained medical personnel, we need necessary medical supplies, we need medicines, we need personal protective equipment, and we need various other medical instruments, etc., for testing and for treatment and so on, in order to deal with this menacing pandemic. And for that purpose, a voluntary contributory fund was created, emergency fund was created. And lo and behold, very quickly, all that started taking shape. And as of now, today, we can say that the health officials of these countries are working together. So this is a forward movement. The only question is whether more steps can be expected in future.
Right. Thank you. Sir, with respect to the Northeast, I mean, you spoke about the Northeast in this context. Now, there are, Northeast, for Northeast, maybe the BBI and even the BIMSTEC mechanism makes much more sense just in geographic terms, because it sends out a set of it's in the geographic center of this whole area. Northeast is also very keen to connect to the Bay of Bengal for opening up its trade and potential and evacuating its power. So in that context, do you think that a similar initiative within the BIMSTEC nations would also draw some traction, or do you think?
Thank you. Thank you. That is a good, thought-provoking question. I would like to really make 2 fundamental points here. First is that, as we all know, SAC also has at least 3 member states which have direct interest for Northeast. That is, Northeastern countries are interested in the way relationships are developed with these 3 member states, and they are Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. So in whatever fashions, these 3 countries are cooperating with India to counter the pandemic, it would be and it should be of interest to people in Northeast. But going beyond that and coming directly to your second question, I have to say that BIMSTEC is undoubtedly of much greater and more direct appeal to the people and governments in Northeast. BIMSTEC made a great deal of progress between 2017 and 2018, starting from about January 2017 to about the middle of 2018, when the last summit took place in Kathmandu. Since then, it is a fact that we probably are not hearing all that much about it. But I would like to take this opportunity to share my very positive and reliable reading of the situation, which impels me to say that probably BIMSTEC has been making good progress, but quietly. And therefore, in the months to come, we will be hearing as to how the fundamental decisions taken at Kathmandu will assume a very clear shape. Now, in that context, I think we have to remember that the BIMSTEC framework has very little as far as health sector cooperation is concerned. There is some mention of cooperation in the field of traditional medicine, but there was really no elaboration of any potential for cooperation to deal with the pandemic. And maybe that is the reason why so far BIMSTEC as an institutional forum has not been directly used. However, I think I want to add that I have no doubt that authorities in Delhi are in touch with both other neighbors, that Myanmar and Thailand, and have been holding conversations both at the level of the ambassadors but also through their headquarters as to how India can collaborate not only with Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal, but also with Myanmar and Thailand, so that the region, the external region surrounding Northeast or adjacent to Northeast, remains fully connected with India in its great fight against COVID.
Right, right. So, sir, thank you for that. And follow up, I have a follow up question and a comment. In fact, yesterday I was part of a webinar in which some tourism professionals were talking about their woes of the tourism industry essentially, and there were some policymakers, including the additional secretary from the tourism department in Government of India. What was echoed was largely that the tourism industry, and I bring in the tourism industry in particular because a large part of the northeastern region of India depends on tourism for its economic development, essentially. That has been a central theme of developing the Northeast, that have tourism there. And what came out was that new products and new innovations in the industry are needed. So, just as an example, could BIMSTEC tourism forum could and in that context, regional tourism becomes a very, very big enabler for a post in a post COVID recovery, post pandemic recovery, where certain different ideas and different events and different programs are put together to increase regional tourism. I have two questions on that context. In the Northeast, we've had two events back to back. First, we had the crisis of the NRC and followed by the CAA, which stopped the whole tourism industry, which was discouraging, which was very suspicious of of regional movements, essentially. And then we have now the pandemic of COVID, in which the tourism industry has gone totally, has stopped. So post-COVID, do you see regional cooperation between the BBIN countries and extending to BIMSTEC to invent and innovate new ways in which people can, in which tourism can increase? For example, medical tourism could be one of them. Educational tourism could be one of them. We need not keep it only to traditional forms of tourism. Your comments on that?
Yes, I think this is a very topical question. Thank you very much for sharing the inputs from a very useful webinar that you attended yourself here. It is very clear that the pandemic has thrown two fundamental sets of challenges to governments of the region. One is, first of all, how to save lives and how to forge greater health sector cooperation so that people recover soon and fully. But the other aspect, which is the impact on the economy of each of our societies, that also is very, very important. Essentially, it means life and livelihoods. So in that second context, it is very clear, it is a matter of great anguish that among the industries which have taken a direct hit figures the tourism industry. This is happening at the global international level, and therefore it is not surprising that it is happening at the regional level. It's a question of obviously having now really no means whatsoever to travel anywhere, which in any case is not allowed in the interest of, the collective interest of mankind. But, we should look forward to the day when slowly normalcy will come back in a few weeks' time. And at that time, I'm quite confident that tourism will receive the priority that it deserves. I can also say that in the BIMSTEC's exercise to rationalize and prioritize a very long list of sectors, 14 or more, when they cut it down and when they prioritize it, I'm fairly confident that tourism would still remain a priority for BIMSTEC. And therefore, our friends in Northeast should be looking forward to the day when they can start re-collaborating with their partners. Here, I think I would like to use this opportunity to make an appeal to particularly friends of Northeast who live outside Northeast. What has particularly pained and anguished me is to hear about some of these unfortunate incidents where young people from Northeast in various parts of India, they have faced abuses and discrimination and rough and rude treatment by some, uneducated elements who somehow think that there is some connection between COVID and the Northeast. This is totally untrue. There is no connection whatsoever. By the grace of God, the Northeast region has not been all that deeply affected by this pandemic. There is no connection whatsoever. And therefore, I think it is the duty of every national of India to respect and be courteous and be nice to all people from the Northeast, because they are all our respected countrymen and women. And I think it's very important for us to be correct on this so that national unity and national solidarity remain strong.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And I think you have spoken the hearts out of so many of us who couldn't agree more with you. This has been a big point of concern as to how this has been panning out. But hopefully we see that there are actions also being taken. Yesterday in Hyderabad, some people were, I believe, arrested for stopping some Northeastern friends from entering a supermarket. So, sir, my final question to you is that how do you see the future of? I mean, we have something called the Act East policy, which is one of the pillars of India's foreign policy, and it directly has an aspect of the development of the Northeast. Now, do you see that in a post-pandemic and an era of when the world has faced such challenges as COVID-19, the spirit of regional cooperation, the small irritants that were there previously prior to the pandemic, those being sort of forgotten, and we have much more of a spirit of much more force behind the Act East policy. How do you see the Act East policy panning out post what's happened now, essentially? That would be my
Sabya, thank you for asking this question. It is very close to a theme on which I spend a lot of time researching and writing. I think if we look at the context, it is very clear that the previous version of this policy, that is Look East policy, had reached a certain plateau in 2014. And when the Modi government came, happily and fortunately, they took a number of initiatives, to transform it into the Act East policy. And I think the period between, say, end of 2014 to sometime last year, the policy developed very well. It had a very clear political dimension. On the economic side, it showed progress. On defense and security cooperation, we also saw further progress in India's relationship with the ASEAN countries. In fact, by last year, Act East policy was developing Indo-Pacific dimensions. So we were all very happy that it was developing quite well. Then, unfortunately, last year, there were, first of all, these developments that you mentioned in Northeast, which inevitably had certain kind of impact. Then secondly, for good reasons, India decided to stay away from RCEP, mainly because our partners were not in a position or were not giving us sufficiently attractive conditions for us to join the Regional Comprehensive Partnership Pact. And then now, COVID has created a rather abnormal situation. In that context, I would still say with sufficient confidence that I basically am very hopeful and confident that India's Act East policy will progress well in future. And the reason for that optimism lies in the fact that this is a policy or a strategy that helps both sides. It helps India, including the Northeast, and it also helps ASEAN and the wider Indo-Pacific region. It's very important for both sides to recognize this and be confident that the policy is well structured and it has goals that need to be secured even more. My last point here would be to appeal to my young friends in Northeast, the institutions, young scholars, others. They should use this time when they are sitting at home with some time at their disposal to study closely as to how Southeast Asia is coping up with this pandemic. We should study, learn from their best practices, see how, for example, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore are handling, the day-to-day issues. We should also be sensitive and kind to other fellow countries, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, which are facing the problem in a much bigger manner than we are. And this will create a great deal of knowledge and sympathy or even empathy so that they will be the future sources of a very robust Act East policy in the near future.
Right, sir. So that's a very powerful thought, sir, to end this conversation on, which is that I think we need to study much more about what others are doing and introspect on what we are doing, so that it forms a basis for future collaborations, future friendships, and overall, I'm sure, as you said, that the government will take this Act East policy forward. On that note, sir, thank you so much for joining us, and we would like at Asian Confluence to take this forward with your guidance, to create a series of webinars, maybe outreach programs to different Southeast Asian countries, to different states in the Northeast, on sharing best practices, not only in the health sector, but maybe also related sectors, such as water and others, which have a direct impact on our future together.
Thank you very much for a very creatively scripted conversation. Thank you, Sabya.
Thank you so much.